Last week, it was officially announced that Ford would be discontinuing the Fiesta nameplate. And though the death of the Fiesta and the Focus have been expected for a few years now, the news has led to a bit of a renewed furore around both Ford's future in Europe and the rise of the SUV. So today on TwinCam, let's explore a little bit of that and try to understand why Ford have ended a legacy dating back nearly half a century. Officially, Ford's line on this is mainly to do with electric vehicles, which is fair enough, and the rise in popularity of SUVs. So let's look first at that point. Of the top 25 best-selling cars in Europe last year, 10 of them were SUVs, and that rather cements the reality that people are perfectly comfortable with them. The Ford Puma is now more popular than the Fiesta. That's just a fact. And me not understanding why doesn't matter. The reality is that the kind of people that now buy or lease new cars are favouring the Puma over the Fiesta. But that trend isn't one that's replicated entirely across the industry. Of those 10 SUVs in the top 25, 4 of them are outsold by their normal counterparts. The Peugeot 2008 by the 208, the Volkswagen Tiguan and T-Roc by the Golf, and the T-Cross by the Polo. Turning that on its head, 3 of those 10 outsell their normal counterparts. The Renault Captur outsells them again, the Peugeot 3008 outsells the 308, and of course the Puma outsells the Fiesta. And the final 3 don't have a directly comparable normal counterpart being sold in Europe: the Hyundai Tucson, the Dacia Duster, and the Volvo XC40. So that's a very mixed picture. Clearly, normal cars are still overall more popular, but they're routinely interspersed with SUVs and crossovers. Now, because of world events, we can't really look at percentage changes over the last few years. But if we go back 10 years to 2011, the picture we see is unsurprising. Because back then, there was only one SUV in the top 25, the Nissan Qashqai. So there's no doubting the growing preference for SUVs. But if we look at Ford's overall performance next to its rivals, we see something much more interesting and telling about the Blue Oval's form. In 2011, Ford had 2 cars in the top 10, the Fiesta and Focus. But by 2021, they'd both gone from the top 25. Their best effort was the Puma in 20th, and that's a horrendous come down when we look over to Volkswagen, who had 3 in the top 25 in 2011, but now have 5. Even Opel have managed to survive it, with the Corsa and Astra both in the top 10 in 2011, and while the Astra's now fallen away, the Corsa's still going strong in 8th. So while SUVs are taking over, Ford aren't making a success of it. As I mentioned last week, Ford dominated the UK market every year from 1968 to 2020, and the Fiesta was always up there. Always. And it was the UK's best-selling car from 2008 to 2020. But in 2021, the Fiesta suddenly fell from number 1 to outside of the top 10. It wasn't just that it waned in popularity, because it collapsed. And it's not as though it's totally outdated either. A new Corsa may have launched in 2019, but the current Fiesta is only from 2017, so it's not a relic. It's just that the forces faced by Ford are not being fought off. They're suffering massively from the chip shortage, as for quite some time last year you couldn't even order a Fiesta. And they seem to have suddenly stopped marketing it a couple of years ago. With that kind of atmosphere, it's no surprise that the Corsa's risen to the top and ended Ford's dominance. But that doesn't strike me as any excuse for killing off the Fiesta. Neither of these things are the car's fault, but Ford's fault, and the world's fault. But this brings us on to another angle, because it's consistently bandied about that small cars mean small profits. And while that's not always true, it is an easy way of looking at things. Now, I don't know anything about Ford's finances. I can't tell you any of the profit margins, and anything I could say would be hearsay and rumour, so there's no point going into it. But with their SUVs clearly not performing anywhere near as well as the Fiesta and Focus were just 5 years ago, I cannot imagine the increased profit margins in the production of an SUV outweigh the loss in sheer volume we're seeing from their collapse. But coming away from the financial and sales aspects, the SUV fad is one that's been about for decades and decades, but as they just become common as muck and, more importantly, we begin to move towards more efficient modes of transport, the SUV has to die. And if it doesn't naturally, then I think there's a small chance they could be actively legislated against, because you cannot make a decent argument in favour of SUV ownership. They are categorically and scientifically worse than any other type of car. They're larger and heavier, which means they consume more fuel, and these 2 points combine with their centre of gravity to mean they're worse to drive. There's no efficiency or driving-based advantage to an SUV. But the Mini, for one, people always bring up is practicality. But pound for pound, an SUV is no more practical than another type of car. Of course, the key to practicality is packaging rather than size, but generally there is no advantage. The other point is visibility, which is total rubbish, as if everyone had an SUV, that advantage would disappear. Conversely, if everyone had normal sized cars, we'd be fine. And if you hit a pedestrian in a normal car, it's a lot less like being hit by a bus. But the final and most important point is getting in and out, because there are a lot of people who require a taller driving position because they have limited mobility. For many of them in the current world, an SUV makes perfect sense, and fair enough. But that's nothing an original Renault Scenic can't do, and today, you could just get a Honda Jazz. So the idea that Ford are doing this to concentrate on their SUVs is misguided at best. The best case scenario, however, is that due to the packaging constraints of designing an electric vehicle, i.e. the placement of the batteries, Ford's future electric range may resemble an SUV, with a higher driving position and massive sills like the Hyundai Ioniq 5. It may be that they're readying us for a new design philosophy, but that still doesn't excuse the silly wheel sizes and ridiculous ground clearance of current SUVs. So to the electric question. This one's much simpler, as despite anyone's views for or against them, they're already here, they're very popular, and if parliaments across the world stick to their word, they will be mandated. So any manufacturer that isn't investing in electric is doing a very stupid thing. And to some extent, that includes Ford. The idea that they're transitioning rapidly to electric is questionable, as other manufacturers have cars like the Corsa E and the ID3. Ford's two biggest traditional competitors already have electric versions of their normal cars, and there's no discussion of them killing off the petrol-powered equivalents. Ford, on the other hand, have hybrids, but have no fully electric cars, barring the Mustang Mach-E. So what have they been doing? The word is that the new electric Fords are going to be sitting on Volkswagen platforms, which might save money, but surely is a bit of an insult to their heritage. But still, they're killing off their bread and butter in favour of something that doesn't exist yet. And I cannot fathom the lunacy of the decision making. But Ford seems to be making a habit of this. They've totally failed in the marketplace since 2020, and it wouldn't surprise me if they kept that form. I hope they don't, and if I've missed something or I'm looking at this in completely the wrong way, then do please leave a comment down below. Because to be fair, this is a script I've just made up in half an hour. But for the moment, nothing's set in stone. The entire future of Ford in Europe is at stake, so on that note, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'm forever indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, so if you'd like to support me that way, then please do follow the link in the description. And I'll have more videos coming along soon.